So, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Carrie Riccio Aguero, Director of Student Services for Manhattan Beach Unified School District. And we are really appreciative to have you all out in preparation for our community conversation surrounding gun violence awareness. We really want this to be a community conversation, to be able to educate, to be able to inform, and to have some of these different conversations with our children, with our students. I'm a mom as well, so having conversations around gun violence and around awareness are also crucial, whether students are at school, in the community, or whether they're off at college or adults. So having these pieces, having these conversations is really important to us. This is in preparation for Gun Violence Awareness Month. As you all know, that happens during the month of June. So June 6th is the day that everyone's encouraged to wear orange to support those pieces and those conversations as well. We're very eager to have a phenomenal panel here for you tonight. In regards to this conversation. And without further ado, I'll turn this over to Dr. Alice Quo.
Thank you so much. First, I wanted to thank Beach City's Health District as well as Manhattan Beach Unified for putting this panel together. I think there's been a lot of conversations in the community. My name is Alice Quo. I am incoming chair of the Medical Advisory Board for the district. I'm also on the board of MBEF, and I have four kids currently in the district. So two at Costa, an 11th grade boy and 9th grade girl, and a boy and a girl in 8th grade at MBMS. So because we're at MBMS, we knew that there was, a lot of questions and conversations, discussions around gun violence and potential gun violence, I think. And I think that's why we wanted to participate. In my day job, I'm a professor and chief of medicine pediatrics at UCLA, and I teach in the Fielding School of Public Health. And so I have given kind of lectures on this topic. And I just wanted to, oh, sorry, push the down button. Nope. It's not moving.
Just worked.
It doesn't like, okay, yeah. Oh, maybe push this button and see what happens. Here. Oh, there we go. Wait. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we'll go back. So on the panel tonight for us is Dr. Kevin Fang, an associate professor at the Keck School of Medicine of USC, and he's a professor of pediatrics. And then we have Lieutenant Justin Hidalgo from the Manhattan Beach Police Department, Carrie Ann Lawson, our clinical director at All Cove Beach Cities, and then Dr. David Schoenfeld, the director of the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. And I think each one is going to give a little perspective on talking about guns in our community and how we can keep our kids safe. So I am just giving the current state, and I think it's important, especially as parents have come to me and asked questions about incidents at the middle school, that, our country is kind of unique in the world as having one of the highest rates of gun-related deaths among developed nations, with over 48,000 firearm-related fatalities reported annually in recent years. And these are a combination of suicides, homicides, and also, accidental or, accidental shooting. And so mass shootings remain frequent. We hear in the news to the point where it's almost not a rare occurrence, and unfortunately, public gatherings are common targets. So schools of all ages, as young as preschool and even on college campuses at UCLA, we had an incident in 2018, and places of worship, unfortunately. So, I think that when communities like ours think about gun violence, we think about maybe to the east of us, East Los Angeles, South Los Angeles, Inglewood even, and we don't think about it touching our community here in the South Bay, right? So we have Manhattan Beach, we have the beach cities. And last year, many Manhattan Beach residents don't actually know that there were some incidents at Redondo Union, and much more significant than what happened here. I happen to practice at the UCLA Health Clinic in Redondo, and so we had many patients coming in and telling us what was happening there at the school. And so I think it is an opportunity again for us to have a conversation about this. And then, we are not going to talk about politics, I guess, here, or policy. I think we'll answer questions as appropriate. But as you know, in this country, it's very controversial. There are many gun enthusiasts who would like to lessen some of the policies and some of the laws around safety. California actually is one of the states with strong gun policies, gun prevention measures. And there's a whole history behind that. But still, we have gun violence here in California, despite those strong laws. Okay, so this is our agenda, and Dr. Fang will be talking about reducing the health harms from firearm violence. So without further ado, Dr. Fang.
Thanks, Dr. Quo, and I think I'm going to tilt this up so it's not half my face, half my body in this Zoom call. Thank you, everyone, for having me this evening. Again, my name is Kevin Fang. I'm an associate professor at the Keck School of Medicine, and I practice at Children's Hospital Los Angeles as a general pediatrician. And I was a former public school teacher myself. So, keeping kids safe in all different areas is really important to me. So just kind of some background information, and this comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on gun violence, that firearms are now the leading cause of death in children under age 18 in the United States, surpassing motor vehicle accidents. I believe in 2019 was when the lines crossed. Estimates are that about 1 in 3 children in this country live in a home with a firearm, and specifically 4.6 million children live with an unlocked and loaded firearm in the home. Interestingly enough, about half of unintentional injuries actually occur in a home. And what I think a lot of people don't recognize is that even a toddler can fire a gun or fire a firearm. And so between 2015 and 2023, in one study, 1,000 toddlers or preschoolers unintentionally shot someone, whether it be themselves, a sibling, a friend, or a parent. And then, kids are curious. And so if, the media sometimes romanticizes firearms. And so children may want to show it off to their friends, or teenagers may want to show it off to their friends. And so it's of the utmost importance, if there are firearms in the home, that they're safe, stored safely. And we'll talk about later what that means. And so the approach of pediatricians is to operate from this perspective that guns exist. And because they exist, how do we keep our children as safe as possible from the impacts of firearm violence? This is the graph that I was talking about. It's from a New England Journal of Medicine article from a few years ago. I'm looking at, you'll see on the right there, firearm injuries crossing motor vehicle crashes as a #1 cause of deaths in children and adolescents in the United States. You'll also see the other big uptick is drug overdose and poisoning that has occurred over the last several years. So this idea is something called harm mitigation. It comes from the public health sphere. So I have a public health degree myself as well. And so the idea is that acknowledge that the thing that creates harm exists, right? So guns exist. And so rather than removing them, because as Dr. Quo stated, there are political challenges in this country regarding that. And it's also a part of the Second Amendment within this country as well. So rather than remove them, the focus is to decrease the risk of injury. And so similarly, you can apply this to motor vehicle accidents. It was very successfully applied to motor vehicle accidents. There were car crashes and children and adults were being harmed. And so seatbelts and car seats, they were all introduced. The goal was not to remove cars from the road because that would be near impossible to do given the zeitgeist and the culture that we have in this country. And so how do we keep people safer in case accidents occurred? Similarly, more recently, when we talk about substance use or substance misuse, these substances exist. We wish we could eliminate them all, but because they exist, How do we keep our children and teens as safe as possible? Well, that approach has been to distribute education and also distribute naloxone or Narcan available to people in case they happen to encounter these drugs without knowing. I want to take it a bit of an aside because when we talk about firearm violence, we also have to talk about mental health issues. And often those come in conversation together. And just like firearm injury is rising, suicide attempts and risk and completion is also rising as well, especially post-COVID. So in 2021, it was from a national survey, 22% of high school students reported that they considered suicide. That was also 30% of girls, 42% of youth with disabilities, and 48% of youth who identify as LGBTQ+. And I think when people think about suicide, they often think it's a kid with a plan. The reality is that that's not always the case. Teens are very impulsive. Those of you who may have teenagers, or all of us were teenagers at some point, may remember being fairly impulsive. There is a biological reason to this. The last part of your brain to develop is the front part of your brain. It's called the frontal lobe. That helps us make good decisions and helps us with planning. That is the part that continues to grow through your teen years into your early 20s. And so teens don't have a fully formed frontal lobe, so we cannot blame them for being impulsive and making rash decisions. Like I said, many teenagers who attempt suicide do not have a history of depression, and they may intervene without much thought. For example, a relationship ends, that's very hurtful to them, whether it's a romantic relationship or a long-term friendship. There's loss in the family, and they make a really split decision. And so we need to make sure that we keep our teens and youth as safe as possible, recognizing that those things are going to happen. And so there's this campaign called Means Matter. It comes out of the Harvard Public School of Health, recognizing that attempting suicide by firearm is the most lethal method of suicide. So it's the most likely way to complete suicide. The higher risk populations for this tend to be teenage boys. So while girls are more likely to attempt suicide, boys are more likely to complete suicide. And part of that reason is the method that they happen to choose. Teens with mental health issues and teens utilizing substances or misusing substances are also more likely to complete suicide. When we talk about mental health, however, it is important to recognize that not every child with a mental health concern will seem depressed of what we typically think. Teens can often be really good about masking their feelings and may not show it on the outside. And so ultimately, this idea is reducing access to lethal means is what saves lives. Stats show that 90% of people who attempt suicide do not end up dying by suicide. So it's not like if you save this person from a suicide attempt once, you're like, well, what's the point? They're just going to commit suicide again. That is not true. Right? Going back to this impulsivity that occurs in the teenage years. And so what can we do? And so I broke these next two slides down to what we can do as individuals and as the community together, and then applying public health strategies, what can we do about firearms specifically? So one is what we're doing tonight, talking about safe storage. I mean, Lieutenant Algo, I believe, is going to be chatting a little bit more about that after me. The next thing is in our homes, I would encourage everyone to have open conversations with their children about firearms. Parents underestimate how children will behave when they see a firearm. I think a lot of people presume that their child will know what to do, but in reality, that may not necessarily be the case. What we think they will do may not be that case. So I think it's always helpful to practice scenarios or talk through what scenarios may look like. So for example, asking them, what would you do if you saw a gun? And that can be on the ground, like I do in my clinic with children as early as 5 years old. I ask them, if you were to see a gun on the ground, what would you do? And hopefully that helps introduce that, that conversation for families at home. If at a friend's home, at our home, at a family member's home, or at school, what would you do? Another important talk that we mentioned or that I mentioned earlier was that the media sometimes will romanticize gun use or firearm use. And so talking about exposure to firearm violence in the media and video games and recognizing that you don't get another life afterward. And so it is important to recognize the harm that can be caused by firearms. And then finally, an open discussion about mental health and recognizing that it is an issue. Many people go through it and being really open with the mental health issues that may be going on. And then we talk about a community. This kind of, I think, depends on your relationship with other people and recognizing the community around you. One of the recommendations from the Academy is to consider having conversations with the parents of the children your child spend time, whose homes your parents spend time in. Did I say that right? If your child is spending time in someone else's home, if you feel comfortable doing so, having that conversation, asking them if there is a firearm in the home. And the example is like sharing them, oh, my child has these allergies or these food aversions. I just want to make sure that you know. And also I ask everyone who my child spends time with whether that there's a firearm in the home. This is not here nor there. I just want to make sure my child is safe. Some people may not feel comfortable at that conversation. I think that's okay too. And I think that's why it's important to equip your own child and prepare them in case they did see a firearm in someone else's home. There are violence intervention programs that can occur in the community. So for example, if someone has a history of physical violence, that there are programs in the community for recidivism to try and support them because they might be more likely to either harm themselves or harm someone else as well. And then partnerships that exist tonight, right? We're bringing together school partners, physicians, we're bringing in law enforcement together to have conversations about how we collectively as a community keep our children safe. This is just like the cutesy, like we're pediatricians, we like really great cartoons and kind of just summarizing some of the things we're saying today. Children are naturally curious, even about a firearm they've been warned not to touch. Kids are safer when firearms in a lockbox, safe and unloaded, and that ammunition is locked away separately. And then kids are safest when firearms are stored outside the home. There was one slide here that I wanted to chat about before we went to that. And talking about firearms, we are going to talk about safe storage as well. One of the things I wanted to bring up about firearm safety, and I believe you're also going to talk about like biometric guns and spark guns. Not the guns, just storage. Okay, just storage. Okay. So there are safe storage techniques that Lieutenant Hidalgo will talk about. There are newer firearms that have smart technology on them, and so it only recognizes specific users. And so that is another way if you are a gun owner to make sure that that gun is safe within your home because only specific people can use it. It's very new technology, and so this way a child would not be able to fire that firearm. And then also when we talk about firearms is if there is a history of a like serious mental health issue or a history of previous violence or a history of substance use for a teen in that home, we would strongly encourage removing the firearms out of that home. And that those firearms can go to a family member, they could, someone else, a family member in another home, a friend in another home. Gun clubs will store firearms. I would presume police stations would store firearms in those cases because we do want to make sure that that family feels safe and you're also protecting that youth from themselves and also protecting them from potentially harming other people. And then this is this QR code goes to this website. So the AAP has a website called healthychildren.org where they present a variety of different health topics, and they have one on guns in the home and how to keep children safe, and that's where that cartoon was pulled up from. All right, those are my references. Questions at the end or questions at the end? Okay, thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Justin Hidalgo with Manhattan Beach Police Department. I serve as a patrol watch commander as my day job. I've also been a firearms instructor for the last 15 years, so I know a little bit about firearms. So I'm going to talk to you today about storage and why that's important. One, unsecured firearms increases the risk of accidental shootings, suicides, and theft. The majority of school shootings or shooters have acquired guns from their home or relatives. And in California, gun safety isn't just a personal choice, it's actually the law. You can be punished criminally for not securing your firearm if you have one at your house. If you don't have one, hopefully you can help educate other families that do. And if your children are playing at neighbors' houses or family members that do have firearms in the house. So that particular penal code is 25-100. So what it says is it's a crime to store a firearm where a child or prohibited person can access it. Prohibited person would be like an adult that has a felony, things like that. And then it has different tiers of punishment depending on what happens with that firearm. The most severe is 3 years in prison, and that's if great bodily harm or if the gun was used in a crime. I would imagine, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. They do in California, yes. And then also there's the civil liability aspect where you can get sued civilly by whoever was affected by that violence. So let's see, going over what actually secure storage means. So for California law, the gun has to be in a fully enclosed container, either locked with a padlock, combination lock, what else? A key, or something similar to that. You may have, if you've purchased a gun, you might have noticed that it comes with a little cable lock. Might be on this next slide. So these cable locks and trigger locks do not satisfy the requirement for a fully enclosed container. It is better than nothing, but really to store your firearm, it should be in one of these locked containers. If you're using a combination or a passcode on it, I would not use something that your youth can figure out easily, like your birthday or common combinations that you might use around the house, favorite phone numbers or whatnot. To try to pick something that's unique. They do have biometric safes, so where you could use your fingerprint. That's the one on the bottom. Oh wait, it looks like the one on the bottom right, but instead of a key, you use your fingerprint. That's a little more secure because it's specific to the user. Yes.
So, it seems as a pediatrician common sense to store the gun or the firearm and the ammunition separately, but for people who have firearms for safety, so to speak, is that like a deterrent? They don't want, if an intruder comes into their house having an unloaded gun.
I mean, it certainly is. We've heard the argument. It certainly is faster if it's loaded already, but you have to kind of weigh the risk. If you have children in the home, maybe it's smarter not to have it loaded, have the ammunition separate. You might be able to take a bigger risk if you're single and live alone type thing. So you just have to weigh that risk. If storing or transporting your firearm in a vehicle, it needs to be in a lock, also the same lock container. The glove box or center console do not count. You can be charged criminally for that also. And at home, when if you do have these safes, try to conceal them to prevent theft and unauthorized access. Youth are naturally curious, as Dr. Fang said. Hiding a gun is not the same as locking it up. They will find it. Even if it's locked up, they will probably find your lockbox and try to get into it. So having those discussions with your youth is very important to kill that curiosity. And like I said earlier, if your youth are spending a lot of time at other relatives' house or neighbors, schoolmates, just maybe have those conversations with the adults and parents. Ask them if they have firearms in their own homes. That way you can be prepared for it and educate your child on that also. Some resources we have at the police department, we do offer these free cable locks. Just come to the front desk and ask for one. We'll be happy to provide them for you. The California Department of Justice also has on their website a list of approved lockable containers, if you want to take a look at that. And in closing, gun violence takes all of us, police department, residents, school district, and our local groups to combat this issue. This is something that affects all communities and not just ours. So thank you for having me.
The spike too. What were you seeing from the data? Why did it surpass?
I do not know off the top of my head. I mean, it's motor vehicle crashes definitely. Sorry, that's from motor vehicle accidents definitely decrease, but you can tell it's actually also an increase in terms of gun violence. I could not tell you for sure, but I presume it is increased availability of firearms in the country, so with access, and probably combined with intersection of health issues as well, potentially just fragments to communities as well, but that starts becoming conjecture from Washington for the most part. There are more firearms in this country than people.
Yeah.
I think it's like 5 to 1 or something, like 3 to 1. It's like a pretty high number.
Yeah. I'm just sure if it's pre-pandemic. Is it?
Yeah, that's
Is it
pre-pandemic.
Is it romanticizing guns? Is it access? Is it restrictions of laws? Is it just forget about facts? Just your gut.
Yeah, my gut is probably growing in increased access combined with growing mental health issues from citizens.
And I think it's also the lethality of the firearm. So, like a rifle or a shotgun, I think fires like a couple of bullets, but they're, now these, semi-automatic weapons are being used, and there's really no reason that a regular person needs to have that, but that's what is on the streets, and so you have a higher rate of casualty from, and from the public health side, they have declared mass school shootings actually a public health concern because the numbers have risen to the point where, children are dying from these mass school shootings.
Yeah, no, I read it all. I just was curious what you from
So,
a nutrition perspective.
I don't want to conjecture too much on that, but that's actually a really interesting question, so we can go back and try to do a little more research. If you stay after, I'll make sure I have your email so that way we can get you an answer. Thank you. So good evening. Carrie Ann Lawson, Chief Programs Officer for the Health District. I also serve as the Interim Clinical Director for Alcove Beach Cities. And I just wanted to take a minute tonight to form some community around how we're going to support each other through these kinds of conversations. I think it's clear from our previous two speakers, and Dr. Schoenfeld will reiterate for us, we have to talk to each other. We have to support each other. I am the parent of 2 teens myself. This is a difficult time to raise teens in a scary world with social media and all those other things. So my purpose tonight is really to talk to you about how do you access resources? How do you take care of yourselves? We have to take care of ourselves in order to model for our children how to take care of themselves. And so I want to remind you that in our community, you are a South Bay Families Connected school district. They have a wealth of resources, fact sheets, tip sheets, videos, ways to practice conversations, things to think about talking with, things you could share with other parents so that you and your parent group are having the same conversation. It is easier to reinforce boundaries with our children if there are many of us doing the same thing, right? And if you and your friend, your parent peer group are all reading from the same playbook, it becomes easier to form those standards for our kids. Should you require help? We have lots of things. South Bay Families Connected does a parent chat. It's a virtual group that happens once a month in conjunction with us at the Health District. Down at Alcove, we have a parent coach. There are several other parent coaching resources in the area. You can always call the Health District for that information. And then finally, I want to remind you that we do have our brand new Alcove Youth Wellness Center. I say brand new, it's been 2.5 years, so maybe I don't get to say that anymore. But we serve young people ages 12 to 25. We are a drop-in center. You don't have to call for an appointment. So if your child is in crisis, if you're in a conversation you don't know how to handle, all you have to do is come to us between the hours of 1 to 7, Monday through Friday.
I've also brought you tonight on the table over there, and we can make sure we put out with the resources a fact sheet on how, whether you come to Alcove or you choose to pursue some other kind of mental health counseling, there's a fact sheet on how to work with your health insurance, different types of payers, how you find that kind of care here in the South Bay, and then of course our fact sheet for Alcove. So we're here for you. Please take the health district's number. Please think of us when you need support. There's not many questions we can't answer, and my team will work to find the resources for you. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Schoenfeld.
So my name is David Schoenfeld. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician at CHLA, and I direct the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement, which is located there. And I'm not going to tell you much about the center, but we respond to crisis events. Been doing this for a little over 30 years, and the program has been continuous since then. So we do a lot behind the scenes. We've actually been out to the Beach City area doing training for the schools in the region. But we've, coordinated the response for the first week after Sandy Hook. We were out at Marjory Stoneman Douglas and Broward County schools monthly for about 3 to 4 years. We're working with New York City schools. We've been out, just got back a couple of weeks ago from another visit to Appalachia High School. But we also work with natural disasters, suicides and suicide clusters. So the natural disasters are wildfires, flooding, earthquake in China. It's a long list. So we usually get about 2 consults per week, and you add that up over 30 to 35 years, it's a long time. So what I was asked to talk about was a little about how do you talk with your own children about frightening events that happen in the community or in the news. I only have 4 slides, other than the title slide and some resource slide at the end. So please ask questions, and I can use my time really however best suits you, but I thought I would just go over that general issue. So, and I do want to say also, I say children whenever I mean anything from birth to 21 or a little older. It's a pediatrician thing. So I just don't like saying, school-age children, adolescents, youth, young adults. It's just a little wordy. So I just say kids and children. So the first thing is we need to recognize we should talk to them about this. And being silent about a risk or a crisis that's occurred doesn't protect children. It only prevents them from understanding and coping with it. And the reality is that children probably already know. They tend to know much sooner than you do about crisis events that occur, whether that's in their school, in the community, or in the national news. I have 2 kids, one's 35, one's 32. I've only beat them once, and that was when a school that had a mass shooting, it was actually Appalachia High School because we worked with the community next to them. I knew people in the Department of Ed. They called me before it actually started to trend nationally. And my daughter happened to be there from New York, and she was like, "Dad, I'm impressed." And she heard about it 3 or 4 minutes later, so it wasn't a big difference, but they actually usually find out first. So what you want to do is begin by asking them what they already know, and then look for misinformation and misunderstandings, particularly if that misinformation causes distress. But recognize that even if you try and keep it a secret, you will not. I remember I was working with schools in that were near Mandalay Bay where the shooting had occurred. No, I'm sorry. We did work with them, but this story was actually in Aurora, Colorado, after the movie theater shooting that happened during the summer. And so one of the parents was talking with me. Her child was going to start kindergarten, so he was just about 5. And she had said that she didn't tell him. She worked at the school, but he hadn't even started kindergarten yet. And she thought he was just too young to talk about it. So she blocked all communications about it. She didn't turn the TV on or the radio or leave the newspaper out, and didn't talk about it in front of him. And then after a couple weeks, she just said something at dinner about maybe we can go see this Disney film. And the kids said, "I don't think that's a good idea. There's somebody shooting people in movie theaters." And she looked at him and she said, "Where did you hear that?" And he said, "You remember you took me to the Y for swimming lessons? One of the kids told me in the pool." Now, the thing that really bothered her was that her child was worried and didn't share that with her because she had never talked with him about it. So he picked up the cue. It's something you don't talk about. Saying nothing about these things says a lot to kids. It says either that you're clueless about what's happened, or you are aware but don't know how to deal with it, or you don't think the kid is capable of dealing with it, or you don't want to bother to help them. They're all bad messages, and kids pick them up quickly. So you really want to start a relationship where kids can come and talk with you about whatever's complicated, difficult, and important to them. They don't actually think you know all the answers, but they do want to know that you care and are willing to at least try. We have to realize children understand and react differently according to a number of things. Everyone talks about age and developmental age, but it's also personal experience, personalities, and coping styles. There's some kids who, if you give them more information, they just become sensitized and upset. Other kids can handle and incorporate that information. It makes them feel more competent and prepared. But whatever your child's capacity is, and I say it's the same thing for adults, begin by just providing basic information in simple and direct terms, then ask them what more they would like to know and take the cue from them to figure out how to continue the conversation. I would avoid exposure to graphic images, repetitive media coverage. It's useful to know what's happened enough so you feel you understand it and know what to do. It is not useful to know everything. So I think that's a mistake some people make, is they figure, I'll explain it all, and you can get very graphic with children in a way that's upsetting. But it isn't just the violent part. So a lot of times people say, well, don't show them something that's bloody or gory, and hopefully we know not to do that. But even evocative interviews on National Public Radio of people crying because something terrible has happened to them are very upsetting to children and adults. So you don't have to show the physical violence, you just have to show the distress. And what happens is that uncovers concerns the kids have about past losses or trauma in their own lives, or things they worry might happen in their own life. So when I went out after Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, I had already worked with people in Las Vegas. So I got called. It happened on the weekend. I was there on Monday. And so I remember visiting one of the schools, and I'd already done training for them. So they were already aware of this. And they said, we have already had a child in the office who was crying because she's afraid her mother's going to die of cancer. Her mother was diagnosed 8 months ago. But seeing images and stories about people grieving made her worry that she might too be in that position. I was talking at a private school. Initially, they were like K to 12, I think, and the principal headmaster was really only going to have the middle and high school students come. But then as I started my presentation, he walked out, which I never take as a good sign, but he actually went to call the elementary school teachers and tell them to come back because they needed to hear it too. And as we were going over this phenomenon, one of the teachers just said, in math class, I teach fifth grade. One of the kids ran out of the classroom. I had to run after him. He was in the bathroom sobbing about his grandfather that died a year ago. And he said, that's what happened. And I didn't know what to do. They don't have a counselor in that school. He said, I'm just standing in the bathroom with a sobbing 5-year-old, and I'm in the middle of math class and have all the other kids to look at. So it does bring out a lot of this distress, but it also reminds not only the kids, but the adults as well, that we're never really completely safe. And you can do all the right things. You can be a great parent, but you can't prevent tragedy happening. And so people refer to that as, in the bereavement literature, the loss of the assumptive world. We all feel that if we do good and we're good people and we're careful, harm will not come to us. But actually, that is an assumption. And all you have to do is see it happen anywhere in the world, and you start to realize, wait, these are assumptions. Maybe one of my other assumptions isn't going to hold true, and you just feel vulnerable. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't want to talk about it, because they're just feeling too personally impacted. Now, some kids are going to be impacted more than others and may need greater assistance in coping. And so that might be because they had prior anxiety, prior depression, other loss, experiences with trauma. But children who have no apparent connection can still be effective. As I said, this is the threat to the assumptive world. So I remember my daughter who lives in New York. She was a young adult at the time. And what had happened was that there was I think it was in Paris, there was a shooting in a nightclub that felt connected with terrorists. I think it was ISIS at the time. And so I got a text from my daughter that evening, and she said, Dad, going to a nightclub, should I not go? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, my daughter texts me all the time, and I just was like, please get on the phone. I don't know how to answer that question. And I said, what's going on? And she said that she had heard about the shooting that happened in a nightclub in Paris, and that there was a lot of chatter on the internet that it was part of an international plan for shootings in nightclubs throughout the world in major cities. And she said, so I figured Paris, I'm in New York, it could happen. And I said, dear, like if you go to a nightclub and there's a shooting, it's much more likely a conflict between two people in the nightclub than between, international terrorists. And she said, oh, I know that, Dad. That happened last week. Yes.
How much are you seeing as far as kids in school having heard about incidents and shootings in other schools, fear of going to their own school, although there's been no.
Oh, yes, it happens all the time. And it's also, we reinforce some of that through some of our active shooter drills, particularly if they are done in particular ways that are very sensitizing to kids. It turns out, I'm in the American Academy of Pediatrics, like Kevin is, and I was the first author on the policy statement from the Academy that came out about participation of children and youth in active shooter drills and other school security exercises, other safety exercises. And I'm also on the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Committee that's preparing a report that's coming out this year on the impact of active shooter drills, school security measures, and it also has to do with police officers and other security staff, the mental, emotional, and behavioral health on children. And so we've looked at the data. There's a lot. So I've been reading this for quite some time now, and we have found that if it is done in certain ways, it's very sensitizing to children. So the Academy came out already with a policy statement that says that you should not conduct active shooter drills in ways that are what we call high sensorium, that involve makeup to depict blood, that involve individuals posing as victims, because there are examples where they even have had armed police officers come in with loaded weapons and point them at children when it's all a drill, and they don't tell the children or staff. Now, it doesn't happen often, but it has happened.
That's exotic there. Shouldn't do that.
You would, when you, well,
does that still have an impact?
they interviewed one of the school mental health providers in the school, and they said, were the kids scared? Of course they were. That's what we wanted. People need to learn what to do when they're scared to keep themselves safe when there is a real event. So when you say it's obvious, it is not actually obvious to everyone. And if you think about it, certain types of drills and exercises that are realistic are used with first responders because they have to be able to shoot a gun they have to know what to do. It's the same way for physicians. We're trained in simulations that are quite realistic because we want to make sure that if someone arrests or someone has a medical emergency, that even though we're worried and upset, we know what to do, how to do it, and we can do it right away. So that kind of muscle memory and high stress situations are important for professionals. But sometimes what happens is those professionals design the drills for schools, and they don't necessarily translate it for children. But the ones that are done where they know, we also said there should be no deception. Children and adults should all know before it is going to happen and know that it is a drill or exercise. And so in those situations, if done carefully, and they don't involve simulations, because there's sometimes where they will also there are different ways of doing the drills. So in some of the drills, they're actually options based. So children are expected and adults to figure out, should they run, hide, or attack and defend? And so when you start with the options-based training for children, that can be overwhelming to kids, and there's no evidence that that actually keeps them safer. So what we have found is if it's done safely and carefully in most situations for most children, it does not cause extreme distress. For some children, if they've had history of assault, or I went to one school where there had been a shooting, just to give you an example, they had had a shooting, one child was shot and killed, and one of the teachers came up to me while I was visiting, asked to speak alone, and she said, you know what I thought of when that happened? When I was a kid, my dad used to get drunk And one time he took us out on the porch, he put a gun to my head and he said, I can shoot and kill you at any moment. And that's what I was thinking about when this happened. You can imagine if you've had those kind of experiences, or if you've been abused as a child, or you've been in domestic violence, I've actually now had a couple situations where I've gone to one school shooting and the teachers tell me I moved from another place where there was a school shooting. Like they've been in more than one of them. So in situations where kids have certain vulnerabilities, where the staff have certain vulnerabilities, when they're done in particular ways that are not sensitive, or if they have already anxiety, then it can, even the simply done ones can be traumatizing.
So given that in that situation, children out there are more vulnerable than others, have you seen situations where there's been a lockdown in a school situation that turned out to be, you know, a non-event, or it wasn't a shooter, active shooter? Do the kids undergo this sort of trauma by being in a realistic lockdown? This is not a drill, but it turns out to
it can be distressing, but again, it has been shown, or at least it's believed, that the active shooter drills do improve safety for children. And I have actually been to schools that have had active shooting events that you know of, where they have walked me through what has happened, and it's been clear to me that what they did actually did save lives. So what you see in some schools, not all of the schools, I think it have to have newer technology for it. They do kind of what they call a soft lockdown, where doors are locked at all times. And so they're always kept closed and locked until it is time for them to move on to the next classroom. And then it's open from the inside. But otherwise, the doors are locked all the time. And there have been situations in schools that have done that, where the shooter could not actually get into a classroom and hurt anyone. And where all the shooting occurred actually in the hallway, or like people who were in the bathroom or things like that. So there are steps that people take. So I know a lot of times people say, you know, if they have a gun, they can just shoot through the door. But actually, I don't know of any situations where they've successfully breached a school door that was locked. And most of these incidents happen very quickly. And really all you're trying to do is by minutes. Until the first responders come. And a locked door is a useful technique to buy time. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. And we don't have to go through all this. So we can, at any point, you just let me know when you want to stop and open it to, you know, other issues. So I was just saying, my daughter had said to me that, you know, this was happening. And I told her, well, the actual risk of you going to a nightclub is actually quite small. And her comment was, I know it's small. It's just more than it was yesterday. And that's the perception that I think people have, is that it does increase their sensitivity. Other things that come out that I think are common situations that I think you may be confronted with is about blaming. Whose fault is it? Blaming is a way we can kind of regain control of uncomfortable feelings and diminish the sense of personal risk. In other words, it has to be someone's fault when this happens. Someone had to have made a mistake, and we have to fire, remove, or replace that person. Otherwise, I don't feel safe having my kid go back to that school. But the reality is, when you have as many weapons out there and you have people going in and out of buildings all day, that you really can't prevent it 100%. And it doesn't matter what administrator you have, even the best ones are not going to be able to be 100% effective in that. I know people don't like to sit with that. That's uncomfortable. So what I have now done a lot of work and supported administrators in schools after these events. I've had principals blamed. I've had principals and superintendents get death threats. I've had them removed from their positions. I've actually had one that was actually went before a grand jury and was arrested. I mean, you just see this high degree of blame, because if it wasn't someone else's fault, it means you haven't fixed it. And so a lot of times you will find kids like, whose fault was this? You'll see parents do that. They'll direct anger at the school or government officials for not having prevented risks in schools or communities. I'm not talking about we should be holding government officials to make sure they create a safer environment for children. I'm saying when there is an event, when somebody discharges a gun, when someone brings a gun to school, this sense that that should never have happened, I would agree, it never should have happened. But I don't think it's in the control of individual administrators to the extent we would like to think. And misguided blame doesn't ease grief and fear, and it just makes matters worse. I've been in many schools where they have replaced school leadership, they've replaced the administrator, they've replaced the head school resource officer. I remember being in one school where they actually replaced all of those people as part of an investigation, very high profile school shooting. And I remember the kids were talking, it was an assembly and the kids were there. And they said, I know the families whose kids died want to blame them, but they were the ones who saved our lives. And they're the only way I feel comfortable coming back into the school. And you've now replaced all of them. And now you've put people here who don't really know the school. So I've just mentioned that because sometimes reactions you're going to see is anger, and that doesn't really work well. And the last thing is you really want to provide support. Children need someone they trust to listen, accept their feelings, and be there for them. And so you want to find out the child's individual fears or concerns. There's a tendency for us to reassure children before we find out what they're really upset about. And then we're only telling them why we're not worried. And we really have to first listen to children. And we shouldn't tell them that they shouldn't be worried or minimize their concerns, but instead help them learn strategies to deal with distressing feelings rather than pretend they don't or shouldn't exist. So I will tell you how I made the mistake with my kid. She was in high school at the time. And I remember coming home and she looked a little distressed. And I was like, dear, what's wrong? And she said, I'm depressed. And I looked at her and I said, well, you're not depressed. And she looked at me, she said, how do you know I'm not depressed? And I said, well, I guess I don't know that you're not depressed. I hadn't seen any sign of it. I guess really what I'm saying is it would upset me if you were depressed. And she said, well, it upsets me that I'm depressed, but you offered to help. And if it's going to bother you too much to talk to me about it, then I won't, but then you're not really going to be very helpful. I said, okay, you're right. I made a mistake. I am sorry. And then she looked at me and she goes, well, I'm not clinically depressed. And it was so hard not to say that is exactly what I meant. But the point was, I was right, but she was actually more right. I wanted her, I didn't want her to be upset. So I didn't want to see that she could have been, but she was right, she could have been. So I said, well, I'm glad you're not clinically depressed. But if you ever were, I would want you to tell me about it, even if it upset me, because it would upset me so much more if I wasn't able to help you. So I think the thing is, we all do that. No, you're not that upset. No, you don't have an anxiety disorder. No, you're not really going to hurt yourself. That is not really what we should be saying. We should say, tell me more about that. Caregivers, you can share your feelings. And so sometimes people say, if I talk about this upsetting thing, I might get tearful, I might get choked up. And I would say, good. Kids need to see models of how to cope with distress. And if you pretend that it doesn't bother you, then they never see effective models of coping because they never actually see distress. And then you can also share your observations about children's behaviors as long as you do it in a non-judgmental manner. So you can say, ever since there was that episode in your school where someone discharged a gun, I notice you don't stay as late at school anymore, or you seem not to spend as much time with your friends. How are you doing? I think if you say, ever since that happened, you're overreacting, or ever since it happened, you're not playing enough with your friends, then that's judgmental. But you can make observations as long as you do it in a non-judgmental manner. And as you're going over this, let them know you're ready to talk when they're ready to talk. But I always tell people, you invite them to speak, but you have to wait till they accept the invitation. So you remain present physically and emotionally and wait for until they're ready for it. But overall, present positive and reassuring information and present models of effective coping. I think there's too often where we don't just listen to kids and we try and just tell them it's okay when really it is difficult for them. There's just information if you wish to contact the National Center. So, all right.
We can take a few minutes. I know that people have been able to ask questions as we've gone along, but we reserved some time for Q&A if there are any additional questions for any of our speakers. Yes.
speaking to kids, but not just on an individual basis, what would be the model for, you have a scare and it's like the next day, speaking to kids about the scare you just had, and then, I don't know, maybe sorting from there, who needs more help and what to do at that point?
That's a lot of what we do. We actually do write scripts for school for the first warning. So we did that after Saugus High School shooting, for example. We had something to them before school, before the first morning that they open. We do that a lot, and it goes over kind of, here's I want to welcome you back. This is what happened. Because sometimes kids have misinformation or incomplete information. And then kind of you want to emphasize you may have certain feelings or reactions. I am here if you would like to talk about the impact it's having on your learning or your ability to do your classwork. And here is where you can go for resources and supports in our school. And then I usually say this might uncover something that's been bothering you or worries you in another part of your life. And we are here to talk about that. And then I usually say something to the effect of, I'm not going to be talking about this every day, but please know on any day when you wish to speak, there's someone in the school who's ready to talk with you. So we just try and convey that information. We provide guidelines on what to do at the 1 year mark. We also, talk with schools. Let's say there's a shooting in the news and they've had a shooting. We've had briefings with all their administration about what to do the next day in the school. We go over that, and I'll pass this around. This is kind of a guidance document that we wrote about talking to children about terrorist attacks and school and community shootings in the news. So we have that online. It's in English and Spanish, and it goes over what to say to children, why you would say it, and what are some of the questions and issues that they have. I'm just trying to keep brief for the purposes of getting to the rest of questions. Yeah.
Educators in the district and at that school site that had survived a previous shooting in Las Vegas.
Right.
And so for them, this scare was particularly scary.
Right.
And so is there anything specific you would do for like a staff population like that?
Yeah, we do a lot with staff. We talk about professional self-care. We also talk about organizational support for the staff. That's a separate issue. There is a tendency now to talk a lot about professional self-care, but for a lot of people, they interpret that as if I'm distressed about distressing things, it's because I'm not a good professional and it's my responsibility to heal myself. So we also talk with administration and school leaders about how to provide the appropriate supports to your staff. So I could share this because I know they wouldn't mind, but in Appalachia High School, one of the things we recommended was they hired a full-time employee assistance person that's in the school. So they hired someone to be placed in the school to provide the direct support to the staff, because we tend to only do that for students. They also hired people for students, but they hired it for the staff as well. They did that at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. That's part of our model, is to kind of say, you have to think of staff support as well. I will just say that when any mental health issue affects staff, when it affects children, it's part of the services of the school. When it affects staff, it's an employee issue. So it's not handled by school mental health, it's handled by HR, and it's considered a benefit of employees. They're supposed to be healthy when they come to work. They're not there for treatment. So as a result, they get much less. And the staff, when we have these events, we talk to the parents and the kids and we say, we'd like you to come back to school when you're ready. Do what you can. Participate to the extent you can. We expect the staff to arrive on time, to teach for the entire day, to monitor the emotional distress of the students, and then to figure out how to do more differentiated learning for kids who are having trouble learning because of trauma and loss. And then we expect them to show up on time the next day and do it again. And so it's really a big ask for the staff. So you're right, we do need to think about how we support them.
These are districts.
So right
now, we have multiple layers of protocol, depending upon the situation. But so that's also something right now that we are looking at, that we are addressing, and we'll be looking to. So we're working on all of that to make sure that students and staff feel supported.
And as I said, I've done training for the Beach City School District in the past. In person, done some training. And I didn't say this, but our center is available 24/7, any day of the year. And we respond and provide technical assistance and support at no charge to the schools. So we are a resource that people can just call us. And we respond. We're working now, for example, with tomorrow, I go out to Pali High because we're working with them in the Palisades. Was out at Malibu. I think I'm going to another Palisades school tomorrow morning as well. And we've been out to Malibu and we've worked with Pasadena and Altadena. So we're here, and I know your school system has been in the forefront in terms of trying to proactively look at how to do this. So I was here doing training and presentations before the pandemic. So I don't know the specifics of what they're doing and how they're doing it, but I know they've been thinking about it. But they can fill you in on the specifics because we work with school districts all across the country. So I lose track. And I don't try and keep up with that.
Any other questions?
One thing, not really go. This idea.
Yeah. But for the benefit.
Yeah, I just want to stop the recording.
Ugh.
So thank you all for coming. Dr. Quo, thank you so much for your time and energy
Yeah,
tonight. I can't find my mouse. Thank you.
There's there.
Perfect. And then we'll stop. There we go.
Yeah.
All right.